Last look brought to you by Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn. We save the best for last as we look back over the college football weekend and what that means for the Vols, who, man, they need to beat Georgia or may need some help to make the college football playoff at 10-2, and that is befuddling to me. Do you want to begin with Miami? Played with fire and finally got burned against Georgia Tech. How does that change Miami in your mind as far as a college football playoff contender? And beyond that, if they get there, well, what do they have to do to get there?
Well, first? let's stick with some SEC ball first.
Okay.
We got it because we'll get to Miami. But let's starting with SEC because the story of the weekend was still Alabama. I mean, whatever you say, Dave, they didn't just beat LSU. They beat the brakes off them. They proved that they're not – all the panic of Kalen DeBoer, I think it's safe to say, needs to subside, and that should all be translated to Brian Kelly. Is that fair?
Yep.
And then most notably, Georgia beating Ole Miss. We talked about it, plunges the SEC into chaos. If all chalk happens the rest of the year in the SEC, then you're going to look at Texas finishing 7-1 in the SEC because they're going to be favored the rest of the way. But if chalk goes the rest of the way, you're going to see Tennessee finish 6-2 in the SEC, A&M 6-2 in the SEC, Georgia 6-2 in the SEC, Ole Miss 6-2 in the SEC, Alabama 6-2 in the SEC, and Missouri 6-2 in the SEC, and LSU 6-2 in the SEC. Now A&M and LSU would both be 9-3 overall, but they'd be 6-2 in the SEC play. So who goes to Atlanta? And by the way, Dave, in this college football playoff race, who gets the nod to go to Atlanta is a huge advantage now because there's going to be so many teams in the cluster.
That's true. Did you hear, though, Nick Saban say over the weekend that sometimes it's better not to go to Atlanta? I mean, he is so SEC through and through. I never imagined he would say that, but I think that gives you a good insight into coaches and their thoughts on playing that game.
Yes, you don't want to go to Atlanta in general, but here's the reason you have to want to go this year, Dave. It's such a cluster. You're not sure that you'll be one of the at-large picks if you don't go to Atlanta.
Okay, but you would have to go to Atlanta and win.
They don't hold it again. Yes. But the thing is, you don't want to be in a cluster of 7 at-large teams where there's only maybe 4 or 3 that are going to get a shot. So at this point, you hate to say it. I've been saying all year, guys, y'all know what I've been calling for. I've been saying Tennessee should lose to try to get the home playoff game. Who cares about going to Atlanta? They can't do that now. They just to be sure, just to be safe, they need to try to go win in Atlanta. Because honestly, they're not a guarantee to go to the playoff otherwise. And that's not just Tennessee. That's every SEC team at this point.
I agree with Kevin. He says Caleb thinking Texas is better than the real UT is why Caleb is losing money on his betting this year. Last look brought to you by Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn. Look at me. LASIK, no contact, no glasses. The rest of the college football slate in 15 seconds.
The first step to better vision is to visit ccteyes.com. The information you need is easy to access, and setting an appointment is as simple as clicking the tab. Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn, and Eye Care Optical at ccteyes.com.
Talk to me, Caleb. Rest of the college football playoff rundown.
All right, moving over to the Big Ten. Everybody runs the table, including Indiana, by beating Michigan. Dave, when the year and the dust settles, Indiana plays Ohio State in 2 weeks. That will be the only team they have played with a winning record all year. If that's the case, do they have to go 12-0 to get to the college football playoff, or would you say 11-1 still gets them in because they're an 11-1 Big Ten team?
I'm going to say the same thing I said about a 10-2 team on face value. Now, I know a lot of things could shake that up, but a 10-2 team in the SEC should make the college football playoff. Face value, you know I don't like Indiana being a part of this conversation, but face value, 11-1 in the Big Ten should make it. Now, we may face a situation like Florida State last year, hurt quarterback, stumbled at the end of the season, all that. And we may face the same situation that you pointed out in the SEC where there's 800 10-2 teams. But just on face value, that's how I would answer it right now. I've got to see how things shake out.
Well, then on face value, the Big Ten is pretty much locked into 4 teams in the playoff now. Oregon's not losing again. Ohio State's not losing again. They're going to beat Michigan, and Penn State's not losing again. They're all going to finish 11-1. And Oregon's going to finish 12-0.
Of those teams, who do you feel, given their schedules as well, who do you feel like is most likely to stub their toe?
I mean, Ohio State, because they played Northwestern, Indiana, and then Michigan. But because I guess the rivalry with Ohio State and Michigan could make them stub their toe. But Penn State plays Purdue, Minnesota, and Maryland. They're winning out easily. Oregon is playing Wisconsin. Oregon does play at Wisconsin. That could be a stub their toe, but Dave, even if Oregon stubs their toe at Wisconsin, they're undefeated right now. So they can afford to lose a game. Honestly, if I'm Oregon, I'm resting my starters for that game. So, I think that these schools are locked in. The Big Ten, for all of its talk about non-conference play versus the SEC, there's a lot of bad teams at the lower level of the Big Ten this year, and teams are inflating. So I think maybe Ohio State just because they play Indiana and Michigan, but they're all going to be 11-1 or 12-0, and they're all going to get in. That's 4 Big Ten.
State has Washington at home. That's another wideout. So no, they just beat Washington. Excuse me. Penn State has at Purdue, at Minnesota, Maryland.
Oh my gosh, I'm so scared.
Yeah, but I just feel like James Franklin could slip up and lose one of those. By the way, the Maryland game is Scout Day, which that means keep your kids, your young boy, male children away from that game. All right, what do you got next?
You should keep your young children away from Penn State, period, if you know their history. Okay, sorry.
It's Maryland Scout Day, too, so no matter where you hold that game, you're in trouble if you got an adolescent child.
That is true. All right, so going to move to the ACC. You're right. Miami lost over the weekend. Pitt also was upset by Virginia. That closes the door on 2 teams from the ACC making the college football playoff. The ACC champion is going. Luckily for Miami, they're still probably going to play for the ACC title. But Dave, what it really does is it opens the door for Clemson, because I think Clemson could easily win the ACC title, and they still are in line to actually go to the title game. So Clemson's not dead yet after losing to Louisville.
They're not, and I get the feeling that there'll be one last hurrah by Dabo Swinney. I'm not sure if it's this year or not, but I think there'll be one last hurrah. Who's up next, Caleb?
All righty. Big 12 college football playoff standings get wrecked too. They're not getting multiple teams in, probably because Iowa State lost to unranked Kansas. Kansas State's upset last week, puts them at 2 losses, so they both have 2 losses. BYU survives. They're still undefeated, but they're the only one. But I want to tie this to another takeaway real quick, because the other team that could threaten is Colorado. Colorado is becoming the story of college football, guys. I mean, Deion Sanders is far and away coach of the year. I really don't think it's close.
Yeah, and I talked to, we've got polled a bunch of Heisman voters, and we'll have that coming out, and where Dylan Sampson stands later in the day. And there's a lot of people that right now would vote for Travis Hunter. And I laughed at you when you said that a month ago, but I stand corrected. All right, who's next, Caleb?
Next 2 more. Notre Dame stays safe in their playoff race by blowing out Florida State after Dave thought that would be the upset of the century. But it's not over yet. Notre Dame is still stealing a spot right now, but they do have to play Army, which is a top 25 team, and they could slip up because Army's still undefeated. But that leads to my final takeaway, which is that while Army's undefeated, they still have to play Notre Dame, and Boise State with 1 loss is still the favorite of the group of 5 teams. But are you ready for a hilarious, like catastrophic error, Dave?
I'm ready.
Washington State and Oregon State refused to join the Mountain West outright. You know that, right? Because they wanted to see themselves as above that, as a borderline Power 5 team. So they're in this Power 2 conference in the Pac-10. The committee is not going to recognize the Pac-12 champion between whoever wins between Washington State and Oregon State. They're not going to recognize a conference champion. The automatic bids for the group of 5 are only reserved for the top conference champions. So Washington State is probably significantly better than Boise State, but because they chose not to join the Mountain West Conference, they're not going to be able to be the group of 5 team to get to the college football playoff. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. What would you think of the idea that both teams that make the SEC championship game are guaranteed to make the college football playoff?
I don't think it's a guarantee because
well, no, I'm just asking you what you would think of that rule. Because with the way it stands now, there's not a 3-loss LSU team that can slip in because of the SEC when they had the West and the East.
No, they can slip in. LSU can because
no. You're missing my point.
Okay.
You're taking the top 2 teams in the SEC, right? Mm-hmm. Theoretically.
Yep. Theoretically.
Okay. So when they were in the East and the West, like when LSU got in last year, they were probably the 4th or 5th best team in the SEC.
Right.
So, I mean, what would you think now the way they're doing it of the top, the 2 teams that make the SEC tournament, they go to the college football playoff, they're locks?
I don't think they could do that because the SEC has a formula that determines the top 2 teams that is a stupid formula that contradicts who would actually be the top 2 teams in the SEC with the college football playoff rankings. And I think the SEC should very seriously look at altering this formula. I told you guys this was going to happen, by the way, with the way Greg Sankey set this up. It was stupid. This is why they should have divisions, by the way. And you can't adequately choose the top 2 teams in a conference when you have 16 teams playing an 8-game schedule against each other.